Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome back to another explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive, incredibly turbulent, and totally transformative chapter in history. We're talking about India's complex medieval era.
And our focus today really centers around one massive question. How did foreign invasions and the rise of new dynasties completely reshape India's political map and its society? We're going to unpack the incredible geographical shifts and the deep cultural transformations that shook the subcontinent between the 11th and 17th centuries.
To make this absolutely vast timeline manageable, we've broken the whole shebang down into 5 focused, digestible chapters, defining the era, the rise of the Sultanate, Khilji's expansions, Tughlaq's ambitious missteps, and finally, the true cost of these conflicts.
So, Chapter 1. Defining the Medieval Era.
You know, we hear the word medieval thrown around all the time, right? But the text points out a really important caveat here to clarify the jargon. Originally, medieval was a term strictly applied to European history. You know, the time between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance. But Europe and India had very, very different historical trajectories. So that European definition doesn't perfectly fit. For this explainer, we're just using the term to bracket our chronological boundary. Specifically, we're looking at the 11th to the 17th centuries in the Indian subcontinent.
Okay, let's set up some major chronological anchor points to keep in mind. In 1206, the Delhi Sultanate is established. A little over a century later, down in 1336, the Vijayanagara Empire rises in the south. And then, jumping ahead to 1526, the First Battle of Panipat marks the establishment of the Mughal Empire. Visualizing this sequence of major power shifts is an absolutely crucial foundation before we zoom in on the actual geography.
Moving on to Chapter 2, the rise of the Sultanate.
Following the defeat of King Prithviraj Chauhan in 1192, a massive physical shift took place across the region. And this brilliantly illustrates the vast extent of the new territories under the Tughlaqs and later the Lodis in the north. Contrast that with the incredibly strong regional powers resisting down in the south and east, like the Hoysalas and the eastern Gangas. It was a diverse, highly contested, and literally ever-changing landscape.
But what defined this period wasn't just rapid expansion. It was intense political instability. The Delhi Sultanate actually consisted of 5 successive foreign dynasties of Turkic-Afghan origin: the Mamluks, the Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Sayyids, and the Lodis. While they were constantly pushing their borders outward, they faced fierce internal volatility. Get this, the average reign of a sultan was just about 9 years. Why? Well, because almost 2 out of every 3 sultans seized power by violently eliminating their predecessor. Talk about a dangerous job.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, Khilji and Territorial Expansion.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the specific Persian inscription on this silver Tanka coin. It was actually minted by Alauddin Khilji, who ruled right at the turn of the 14th century.
That inscription? It translates to Sikandar Sani, which means the second Alexander. So it prompts a fascinating question, doesn't it? Why would he call himself that? Well, just consider the massive scale of Khilji's military ambitions. Not only did he conduct massive campaigns over vast areas of north and central India, but crucially, he also successfully repelled several major invasions by the Mongol forces. By doing that, he prevented India from being completely absorbed into the sprawling Mongol Empire.
But here's the catch. Maintaining that kind of high-level defensive and offensive capability required an absolutely enormous military apparatus. Khilji's slave general, Malik Kafur, pushed the Sultanate's reach deep into the south. He conquered kingdoms and extracted tremendous wealth from major centers like Madurai and Srirangam. This constant territorial conquest and aggressive resource extraction, it was entirely necessary just to finance the Sultanate's war machine. But, as you can imagine, running a war machine that massive eventually drains the treasury, totally disrupting regional stability and setting the stage for some major economic disasters.
Let's look at one of those disasters in Chapter 4, Tughlaq's ambitious missteps.
Just a few decades later, Muhammad bin Tughlaq takes power, and he attempts a very bold administrative shift. Step 1. Move his capital from Delhi all the way to Daulatabad. That is over 1,000 kilometers south. He was hoping a central location would offer better control of his vast empire. Step 2. The plan misfires completely. The logistics of forcing an entire population to uproot and migrate were an absolute nightmare. Step 3. He realizes the colossal mistake and forces everyone to shift right back to Delhi. According to historical sources, both of these forced transfers resulted in a massive, tragic loss of human life. It really shows the severe human cost of poor governance.
And incredibly, that wasn't even his only major miscalculation. Tughlaq also introduced a token currency system where cheap copper coins were officially declared to have the exact same value as silver or gold. Now, using a modern anchor, we actually know that conceptually this was highly progressive. I mean, modern global currency is essentially a successful, highly regulated token system. But back in the 14th century, without any of those modern regulations, it led to massive, unchecked counterfeiting. It was a disaster. The trade system plunged into total confusion, and the economy rapidly declined.
So, what did all this mean for the everyday person? That brings us to our final chapter, the cost of conflict.
The source text highlights a very significant element of these historical campaigns: iconoclasm. The text defines this quite neutrally as the rejection or destruction of icons or religious images considered idolatrous. During this turbulent period, numerous Buddhist, Jain, and Hindu temples were targeted. This destruction was heavily driven by a complex mix of both the desire for sheer physical plunder and religious iconoclasm.
So the crucial point is how this history is actually physically layered right into the architecture of the era. Here, we see the towering Qutub Minar standing directly alongside the intricately carved pillars of the Qawwadu al-Islam Mosque in Delhi.
Historical records, specifically an inscription found at this very site, state that materials from 27 destroyed Hindu and Jain temples were repurposed and used in the construction of this mosque complex. It's stark visual evidence showing exactly how the wealth and the architecture of prior societies were dismantled and then integrated into the monuments of the new rulers, again reflecting both that drive for wealth and ideological motives.
Beyond just the architecture, the economic disparity of this era was staggering. The sultans and the court elite enjoyed extremely luxurious lifestyles. We're talking grand palaces, jeweled ornaments, incredibly fine foods. But this was all directly funded by the plunder of military campaigns and exceptionally heavy taxes levied on the common people. The rulers also actively engaged in the Central Asian slave trade, forcing enslaved people into free labor or sending them abroad. Meanwhile, the constant raiding and endless warfare severely disrupted the everyday trade networks and agricultural production that ordinary people desperately relied on just to survive.
We've seen the maps redraw themselves over and over today. We've seen rulers rise and violently fall. But it leaves us with an incredibly profound question to end on. Despite centuries of violent succession, foreign invasion, and massive economic upheaval, how did the everyday people of India ultimately adapt, endure, and survive? It is a true testament to incredible societal resilience, and definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.